Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China calls on Brazil to jointly counter external challenges as they deepen their ties. South Korea's export growth hits 4-decade high on AI chip boom. Hungary's Prime Minister Magyar threatens legal action if the country's president refuses to resign. And NBA star Stephen Curry signs with Chinese sportswear company Li-Ning. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says China stands ready to work with Latin American and Caribbean nations, including Brazil, to deepen and expand cooperation. He made remarks at a foreign ministerial level strategic dialogue with his Brazilian counterpart, Mauro Vieira, here in Beijing. He said bilateral ties have become increasingly global, strategic, and far-reaching in influence. Wang Yi called on China and Brazil to counter various external challenges and build greater synergy for each other's modernization drives and the unity and self-improvement of the global South. Mauro Vieira, for his part, said that Brazil looks forward to consolidating strategic mutual trust, deepening practical cooperation, and achieving common prosperity. So for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. Jiang Shixue, Distinguished Professor at the College of International Relations, Sichuan International Studies University. So thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Jiang Shixue. First of all, this is the fifth global strategic dialogue between China and Brazil. How do you understand this comment from the Chinese foreign minister that ties between China and Brazil are increasingly becoming global, strategic, and far-reaching in influence?
Well, as you know, China and Brazil are very important countries or members of the so-called Global South. And China, largest developing country in the world, and Brazil is the largest one in Western Hemisphere. Also, the two countries upgraded their partnership in 2024 with a name called A Community with a Shared Future for a more just world and more sustainable planet. So in order to achieve this purpose, I think the high-level officials from both sides need to discuss and consult about everything. And as we know that this time, the two foreign ministers discussed lots of topics, ranging from global affairs, international order, to bilateral relationship in the field of economy, trade, investment, people-to-people exchanges.
Yeah. In terms of jointly repelling external challenges, can you put your fingers on the common external challenges faced by China and Brazil?
The world we are facing now is totally different compared with a few years ago. As you know, that the U.S. does not pay any respect towards the UN Charter, international law, all kinds of things. And now it is believed that the law of the jungle is very popular in terms of international relations. So I think both China and Brazil are faced with big challenges. And also the war between different countries are still going on. I think China and Brazil should do something to protect world peace, as well as to maintain multilateralism, as well as to fight against the so-called hegemonies and the unilateralism. So both China and Brazil have a very important role to play on the global stage.
Now, actually, in this dialogue in Beijing, the Brazilian minister said multilateralism is under unprecedented attack, and in that context, the joint construction of a community with a shared future is more relevant than ever amid the current international turbulence. Why do you think the Brazilian side is happy, is willing to endorse China's wording regarding building a community with a shared future?
First of all, I want to point out that, as I just mentioned, that both countries established a kind of a community with a shared future for a more just world and a more sustainable planet. And this partnership is part of the overall partnership for a community with shared future for mankind. So Brazil is willing to construct this partnership with China. And secondly, the US has done many, many things which is negative to the countries in Latin America to protect regional peace. Maduro was kidnapped in early January this year, and Cuba is now under heavy blockade by the US. So for the time being, no one knows what will happen to Cuba. So I think Brazil, as the most important country in the Western Hemisphere, need to join hands with China to protect the regional peace as well as world peace. So both sides should consult with each other on a wide range of topics.
Last year, two-way trade between China and Brazil reached 170.9 billion US dollars, a record high for the 10th consecutive year, actually. Brazil recorded a surplus of about 29 billion US dollars, largely driven by farm exports from Brazil to China. So, what do you make of the role played by trade in terms of consolidating and cementing ties between China and Brazil?
As you know, China's relationship with Brazil is part of the South-South cooperation. And when we say South-South cooperation, it covers many, many areas. And one of the most important areas is to push forward trade and investment cooperation. So as we know that China's economic cooperation with Brazil has been moving forward very rapidly. On the one hand, Brazil has lots of natural resources. On the other hand, it needs foreign capital from China to make investment. At the same time, China needs to import raw materials, needs to open up its market, as well as to make international investment in other countries. So there is a very good complementarity between the two sides. And the result so far is very good. And I believe that in the process of constructing the partnership for a community of shared future, I think economic cooperation will play a more and more important role in the near future.
And now it seems the economic ties between China and Brazil are not just confined to traditional merchandise trade or trade in goods. I think they are also actively exploring new potentials, new opportunities in technological cooperation, supply chain cooperation, etc. Now, actually, according to some media reports, the Brazilian top diplomat's trip to China this time carries an urgent commercial purpose because Brazil is nowadays seeking to secure its fertilizer supplies that have been disrupted by the ongoing U.S.-Israeli war against Iran and the shock at the Strait of Hormuz, for example. And I guess no one needs a reminder about the importance of fertilizer to Brazil's agricultural economy, which is a central pillar industry in the Brazilian overall economy. So what kind of support do you think China is capable of giving to the Brazilian side in this particular field?
Well, Brazil has been doing quite well in expanding its overseas market in terms of many, many things. And China has made a certain kind of contributions towards this end. Now, because of the wars in different parts of the world, so Brazil needs fertilizer. And I think China can offer a certain kind of help in two aspects. On the one hand, China can sell more fertilizers to Brazil, Okay, and on the other hand, I think China can export or can transfer some kind of technology to make fertilizer for Brazil. And as you know, that Brazil's economy is still based on selling raw materials. But over the past 2 or 3 years, particularly since President Lula came to power, Brazil wants to strengthen its foundation for scientific and technology and also technological base. I think in this regard, China can offer a certain kind of help. And Brazil has a strong wish to transfer some technology from China. And this kind of technology transfer is also part of the South-South cooperation. So I can expect that in the near future, China and Brazil will achieve very good results in terms of technology transfer. And for the time being, I think China can do something to help Brazil to increase its output for fertilizer.
During Mauro Vieira's visit to China, there has also been a meeting that addressed the reform of the World Trade Organization. What do you think are the shared interests for China and Brazil in this regard, and how can the two sides meaningfully push forward WTO reforms?
Well, China is an important country for the global market. And over the past several decades, as we can see that Brazil also depends heavily on the global market. So in terms of the global market, we can see that trade protectionism is on the rise. So WTO has a lot to do to promote trade liberalization. And as far as I know, in the framework of WTO, China and Brazil have been cooperating quite well in terms of putting forward new rules to fight against trade protectionism. So if China and Brazil can cooperate with other global South countries, I think trade protectionism can be lowered down. So this is a very important topic. But if we want to achieve this purpose, I think both countries need to sit down and discuss about the ways and means to fight against trade protectionism.
Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Jiang Shixue, distinguished professor joining us from the College of International Relations, Sichuan International Studies University. Coming up, South Korea's export growth hits 4-decade high on artificial intelligence chip boom. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Yan Liang, Peter Magyar Professor of Economics at Willamette University. In a rapidly changing world, staying informed has never been more important. World Today delivers sharp analysis, global perspectives, and the stories behind the headlines. It is your trusted source to understand what's shaping our world. World Today, bringing the world closer.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. South Korea's economy is sending a powerful signal about the global AI boom. Exports surged by more than 53% in May, marking the fastest growth since the year 1984. The growth is largely driven by soaring demand for semiconductors and AI servers. In the meantime, the country's benchmark stock index, the Kospi, has more than doubled so far this year, making it one of the world's best-performing markets. So for more on this, my colleague Zhao Yang spoke with Yan Liang, professor of economics with Willamette University.
So Yan, South Korea's exports grew more than 53% year-on-year in May, and this is the fastest pace since 1984. So what do you think are main factors driving this, and how significant is this moment for South Korea's economy?
Well, South Korea's exports were mostly driven by AI-related product exports. So memory chips, for example, is one of the major driving forces of the exports. When you look at the export growth, as you mentioned, it's 53% in May, year on year. And when you look at the chip export growth, it reached 169%. And on top of that, you also have other like computers and some other products like petroleum products. All of those are seeing pretty robust growth. Exports of automobile, on the other hand, have fallen by about 6%. So this is very significant for the Korean economy. I think is supported by the kinds of strong export growth. Their central bank has upgraded their growth forecast from the earlier 2% to now 2.6% for 2026. So this is a major boost to the Korean economy.
And as you mentioned, the semiconductors or chips exports surged nearly 170% in May. So how much of this growth is directly, tied to global AI infrastructure spending?
Well, it's pretty much driven by the US investments in AI infrastructure, especially like data center. Because we know that the Koreans' exports mostly are these memory chips, and these are really needed for the GPUs, because GPUs require to have these high bandwidth memory chips to process massive amount of workload. And so with the AI buildup in the United States, by especially those larger tech giants like Google, Amazon, and others, there's a very sort of a surging demand for AI related, both in terms of GPUs, but also in terms of these memory chips. So I think that's one of the reasons that you're seeing this sort of AI generated boom in the semiconductor chips production, in the memory chips production, as well as some other auxiliary, I would say, industries and sectors. So I would say, the world right now is very much dependent on the kinds of apex spending by AI developments, including, these upper scale, high scalers. This is really what drives the US stock market, but also Korean stock market. So that's really, I would say AI-related investment boom.
And do you think the memory chips are becoming the new oil of the AI economy? And how sustainable are the current chip prices?
I think it's forecasted to be, I would say, sustainable in the medium term around 2028, is many of the industry experts expected the kinds of demand outstripping supply in the memory chip industry will continue on. And again, all of these is really driven by the AI spending because AI investments in the data center require a lot of these high bandwidth memory chips and also DRAMs. So I think on the one hand, you have these large demand, not only for AI, but there's also some demands for example, some of the product upgrades in Windows system that also require this hardware refreshment that requires the memory chips. But there's also constrained demand because we know the memory chip production is basically monopolized by the three giants and SK Hynix and the Samsung and also Micron. Those are the three major memory chip producers. So when they decided to contain their production or deliberate cut the production after they experienced 2023, 2024 memory chip glut, now they're constraining their supplying capacity. So you have a rising demand and you have relatively constrained supply. I think that's what is generating, this medium-term memory chip shortages and also price surges. And so that could, build up for a while, at least in the medium term. So that's why you're seeing manufacturers right now are really prioritizing premium margins over the supply volume to prevent oversupply cycles.
And South Korea's exports to the US and China jumped dramatically, up by 60% and 80% respectively. So how do you explain that?
Well, I think that, again, explained these are the two leading countries in terms of AI development. And so we know, for example, the United States has today around 3,700 data centers, and China is the second largest, but it's about 1/10 of the US's numbers of data centers. So because these two are the leading countries are AI development and building up, AI centers, and so those are the two countries that require a lot of these kind of AI related chips. So memory chips is one of them. So that's why you're seeing the shipments to the US and China have been gone up, but those to Middle East have gone down, largely due to the Middle East conflict. So I think these two countries' AI development will continue to drive the higher demand for these kinds of AI-related tech products from South Korea and elsewhere.
And we've also seen Kospi has more than doubled this year. So is the market reflecting real improvements in corporate earnings and economic fundamentals, or are investors getting ahead of themselves?
Right. So Kospi rose by 100% this year, and that's on the back of 76% increase last year, and that was the highest since 1999. After the financial crisis, before the financial crises. But I think right now, it does seem to reflect the explosive corporate earning growth. Goldman Sachs, for example, projected South Korea's corporate earnings to hit 300% in 2026. And also, as I mentioned earlier, because the memory chip producers have effectively the monopolized margins. So that really helped to generate a lot of corporate, earnings for them. On the other hand, as I also mentioned earlier, because of this robust chip-driven exports, the Bank of Korea upgraded their GDP growth rate. So it seems that there is the economic fundamental that is also helping to support the kinds of, sort of the booming stock market. But that said, I think there's still risks, right? So one of them is that the Korean market is highly dependent on global liquidity. And you're looking at, foreign investors are now logging on a 18 days consecutive net selling streak because they're logging historical profits and they're taking their windfalls and sell off their stocks. So that leaves the local buyers to prop up the market. So the kind of foreign capital flight could be one risk. And the second risk, of course, is similar to the United States. You have this over-concentration problem because the Kospi's gains now really heavily weighted towards hardware. So if there's any deceleration in this data center, CapEx spending, that could trigger immense index volatility. So I think, while the market is booming, there's still hidden risks that investors need to be remaining, vigilant.
And also it seems that AI is no longer just a technology story. It's becoming a major driver of trade, investment, and economic growth. So are we entering an era where countries that dominate AI hardware will enjoy the same strategic advantages that energy-producing nations once had?
Well, that's a great question. I think there are some signs where, the energy producers and exporters and now the tech, semiconductor chips exporter countries seem to enjoy the similar advantages. But I think there are also, differences. For one is that, as we know, for energy producers, they have the finite, non-reproducible, natural kind of monopoly of these commodities. But on the other hand, for AI hardware, this is a kind of manufactured asset. It's not a natural kind of monopoly. So if price remains high, I think buyers will try to bypass these hardware constraints through, software optimization, algorithm efficiencies, and develop other sort of architecture to bypass the need for really overpriced hardware. So I think the kinds of price advantages probably still have difference. And second is I think that, for energy exporters, they have really the physical reserves under their soil. Whereas I think in the tech world, the kind of dynamics is very fluid. So in other words, a technological breakthrough by a country, by a rival firm or others could really take away the kinds of market share in a short period of time. And lastly, I think, for oil exporters, they can simply enjoy the low extraction costs once they establish their infrastructure. Whereas saying for AI hardware, they need to continue to innovate. They need to spend a lot of their profits into capital expenditures to build the next generation fabrication plants and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I think in the tech world, the kinds of market advantages could be more fluid. And that would also have to, they would have to continue to innovate to keep their kind of competitive advantages.
Yan Liang, professor of economics, was Willamette University, talking with my colleague Zhao Yang. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. We'll be back. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar says the government is going to launch legal proceedings to remove President Tomasz Siódmaz if he does not resign. Magyar made the remark on Monday following a meeting with the country's president. Magyar has pledged to remove several figures appointed by former Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to key public positions. Siódmaz was elected in early 2024 by lawmakers from Viktor Orban's political party. The presidency in Hungary, for your information, is largely ceremonial. However, the president can refer laws back to the parliament for review or reconsideration or forward legislation to the Constitutional Court. So for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. George Zagopoulos, Senior Research Fellow at CIFE, a France-based research organization. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, what do you think is really motivating the new Hungarian leader to try to remove Siódmaz from office?
I would say that the new Prime Minister of Hungary recently won an election with a landslide majority, and he counts on this important victory in order to remove close allies of former Prime Minister Viktor Orban. And I would link his decision to oust the president of Hungary to his determination as much as possible to work with new figures in his administration as well as in other public positions.
So the political party of Viktor Orban has accused Magyar of issuing a kind of unlawful ultimatum saying that Siódmaz, the president, is fulfilling his lawful mandate, which runs until the year 2029, and he cannot really be removed from office. Does the party have a point?
Well, certainly the new term of the president of Hungary expires in 2029, and this means that he has 3 years to go. And within this context, certainly it is a bit bizarre that the new Prime Minister of Hungary places so much emphasis on the removal of the president, taking into account that he just came to office and that he should have dealt with other priorities. Again, as I said before, I would rather link his determination to oust the president with the fact that he wants to remove close allies of Viktor Orban from power. This is the main reason why he is doing so and why he is insisting on the president to leave office three years earlier than the date that his mandate expires.
Magyar has actually, accused Siódmaz, the president of the country, of failing to fulfill his duties at the position of the presidency. How would you look at those accusations? Are they political talking points only, or do you think they are based on real, reasonable facts?
Well, as you correctly mentioned before, the role of the president in Hungary is rather ceremonial. And having said that, obviously, not too much responsibility lies in the hands of the president of the country. Certainly, the political nature of the argument is clear, but as I said before, the new responsibility of the government is to move forward as far as collaboration with the European Union is concerned. This can anyway evolve irrespective of hosting other people who used to be close allies of former Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Is a different thing to chart a new way forward, and a different thing to take revenge of against the people who work together with former Prime Minister Viktor Orban.
So, if Prime Minister Peter Magyar really goes ahead to launch legal proceedings to remove Shiok from office, do you think there is going to be a potential constitutional crisis in Hungary that might, end up deepening the existing social division in this country?
Well, certainly it is a scenario. We have to wait and see what type of legal measures the government will take against the president before making a prediction about a possible constitutional crisis in Hungary. But certainly at the political and the social level, unity will be challenged, taking into account that citizens expect from the new prime minister to chart a new way forward and not to change people serving in different public posts, including the position of the president for political reasons. Again, what Hungarians expect right now is prosperity and a better status in relations with the European Union, not a political adventure which is driven by political motivations.
Realistically speaking, George, do you think it is possible for the new Hungarian leader to push ahead with his political agenda, with his reform agenda, without having to carry out political purges?
Well, I think it is possible, yes, because he recently won a landslide victory and he enjoys a majority in parliament. And that's why I insist so much on the fact that his responsibility is to chart a new way forward for Hungary. And this can happen without taking political revenge. But certainly some politicians feel very powerful days or weeks after winning a landslide victory in parliamentary elections. And they believe that by behaving this way, they can change a lot without necessarily proceeding with the necessary reforms. So what Hungary needs is reforms. It's not a new wave of political problems that will lead the country, as you correctly mentioned before, to a new social crisis that is not in the interest of ordinary citizens.
Thank you very much for joining us and for your analysis. Dr. George Zagopoulos, Senior Research Fellow, will joining us from CIFE, a France-based European research organization. Coming up, NBA star Stephen Curry signs with Chinese sportswear company Li-Ning. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Chinese sportswear brand Li-Ning has signed a long-term partnership with NBA star Stephen Curry and his Curry brand. The partnership comes after Under Armour and Curry split in 2025, ending a nearly 13-year relationship. The deal covers basketball, golf, and active lifestyle products. Both sides are calling it a brand co-building partnership rather than a traditional athlete endorsement. It also includes plans to open standalone Curry brand stores in China and the United States. So for more on this, my colleague Gao Yingshi earlier spoke with Paul Dong, founder of Eversports.
Li-Ning starts to cooperate with Curry right after Under Armour paid roughly about $255 million to end a 30 years relationship with him. So when a deal gets this competitive, what does it tell us of the direction of the global sports apparel market?
What actually lies ahead for both brands in 5 to 8 and then to 10 years, even beyond the prospective retirement of Stephen Curry. Absolutely, I agree with that. I still need a little more time to make sense of this. This is such a big news. My first reaction was I would like to look at a local store of Under Armour and see if Curry's image is still there. Li-Ning with Curry, people, without looking into the details of this new partnership deal, would imagine, wow, why Li-Ning would hire a veteran player like Curry to wear the Li-Ning shoes. But actually, when you calm down and look at further details of their deal, well, yeah, this is pretty logical and natural because you don't look at Curry as an athlete anymore. Curry has his own brand. It's the Curry brand. It's between two brands. And look at Li-Ning itself. We are already, taking Li-Ning as a brand of sports apparels. But actually, Li-Ning, the founder of the brand, was once an athlete like Curry now. So it's absolutely now between two companies, two brands, instead of one company and an athlete. Yeah, I think it makes sense now to look at what's actually going on with the landscape of sports apparel market, around the globe, instead of only China. Of course, it makes sense if Li-Ning further expand market reach, even inside this existing huge Chinese market. Curry would be more than enough to allure and attract even more fans to buy Li-Ning products. But actually, the deal is about not only Li-Ning. Fans will be buying both Curry's and Li-Ning's brands. I think it will be a fascinating idea, very creative, if not unprecedented.
And looking to the range of this cooperation, this partnership deliberately stretches beyond basketball into golf and athleisure. Is single sport branding essentially over? And why this cooperation moving toward kinds of cross-category active lifestyle?
I don't agree that single sport branding is over. It's still growing. It depends on which single sport star you're chasing. Just like 5 or 10 years ago, if you chase Stephen Curry or some of these biggest or rising stars in the NBA or even in the CBA, I think it still makes sense. But when it comes to Li-Ning partnership with Curry, with both brands, I think it makes a lot of sense if Curry is not young anymore and he is probably approaching to one milestone, the end of his professional basketball career. And before kicking off a new one, a brand new one, and it's no secret that Curry is also avid fan of golf, been quite an amateur player already, and is quite well known, and is very keen to develop into that. For relatively mature fans who recognize Curry and follow him, and yeah, it still makes sense for them to try Curry in golf, and as well as in other leisure, sports or even lifestyle. We know that a lot of retired athletes, like golf stars, they actually extended into other areas beyond golf. So it's pretty logical for Curry and Li-Ning to tap into other markets outside of both basketball and even golf.
And looking into the market, Chinese brands spent the last decade competing mainly on product and supply chains. It seems that they have moved on and start building their own brand culture. And do you think that's the game they can win?
Yeah, I think it's these leading Chinese brands. They have a huge market here back home. There is so much potential that they can do to tap into. But at the same time, I think, yes, indeed, there are an increasing number of indigenous Chinese brands who are open enough to look beyond the Chinese territory and try to tap into the European, Latin American, and Euro African, and even American markets. I think that's also very natural and logical because production prowess of Chinese brands, and that is the very fundamental strength of where they can build their brand on, with a lot of new techniques being employed in their production. Not only Li-Ning, but some of the other brands are already quite established elsewhere. If we follow some international sports and major competitions around the globe, and we keep being surprised to see on the sides of the court and other brands that are purely Chinese, and we have to browse around and ask AI, oh, in what year actually did this brand of ours land on that major court? So yeah, Li-Ning has been a major sponsor and partner with the Olympic Games. And Curry himself and Curry brand has also been quite active exploring partnerships with the Olympic movement. And Chinese brands are sparing no time and efforts to go further beyond and to approach with these major international federations of various sports to explore potential partnerships. And I basically think it is a very natural development. These Chinese brands have been there for quite some time already, maybe primarily in China or as an export, but not in their own brands, but on the production side for other major international brands already, and they are developing this experience. I think it's a pretty interesting and encouraging adventure.
China and the United States just went through trade tensions, yet an American superstar just tied himself to a Chinese brand for life, with plans for Curry stores in the United States. What can we learn from the fact that sport and consumer culture seems to keep moving forward even when the broader relationship is tense?
I think I read very briefly about the terms they have reached as reported in the media. Li-Ning can promise to play its role to help Curry brand to further develop the US market. But I think before that, what Li-Ning can do is to help further expand Curry here in China, because Li-Ning has a much broader and comprehensive channels here in the China market. But at the same time, I think both brands have agreed to further develop the potential of the American market, which is the home of Stephen Curry. Well, beyond that, I think we will wait and see how successful the partnership will be in that very demanding opportunity in the US, but it's still built on quite established and well-known name of Stephen Curry. Yeah, people may ask, if Li-Ning really has that potential or a very strong ambition to develop further in the US market, any other personalities like Europeans or even a Chinese star can make that presence in the US through Li-Ning itself or a Li-Ning Curry partnership. Yeah, we will see how culturally the American market will be ready, in addition to those terms that both sides can reach to soften their trade tensions. I think even without those hurdles or tariffs, I think it's still a cultural thing, very big challenge for other personalities and icons outside of the United States to land a foothold in the US market. But we should leave our mind open. I think once you have superstar to claim a major title in golf, for example, if you win any of those three major golfing events in the US, the US PGA Championship, the Masters, the US Open, if an Asian face can And it's on top of those major events in the US, it will make sense for Li-Ning or Curry to tap that icon, that personality, to be a major spokesperson for their brands.
That was Pao Dong, founder of Eversports, speaking with my colleague Gao Yingshi. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Reuters has reported that the companionship economy is emerging in China. It includes paid partners for running, sightseeing, and even eating out at some particular hotspot restaurants. Providers advertise on social media with promises of emotional value, conversation, and realistic help, turning what was once an experience or favor among friends into a bookable and a payable service. Some estimates suggest that the companionship economy in China was worth about 50 billion yuan or 7.4 billion US dollars in 2025. So joining us now on the line is Dr. Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics at Peking University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So imagine you're ready to hike in a mountain and all of a sudden you get to know that you can actually book and pay for a buddy to hike together with you, to carry bags for you and take pictures of you. How would you feel?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction would be a little surprised, or because this sounds a little unusual. I usually hike or go tourism with a friend, and it's a social activity. I found it very natural. But after thinking about it, I think it's not so different from hiring a local guide, a photographer, or a local assistant. I think the key difference right now is that we're not just talking about physical help. We're not just talking about one type of service. It's a bundle of different services, because we can find someone to help us find the route, carry things around, and taking pictures. So basically everything together to make the experience less lonely. And this is extremely appealing for young people, students, or tourists who are traveling alone. And China's domestic tourism market is already very large. We know that the revenue have reached about 6.3 trillion yuan in 2025. And even a small add-on service like this could become a meaningful niche market. And from an economic perspective, I would call this a complementary service, because instead of replacing the experience of traveling to certain spaces, it makes the experience smoother, safer, and also into a more fun and shareable experience. So I think broadly it reflects a shift from simply buying goods to buying experience, convenience, and also emotional comfort.
So what do you think is really fueling this emergence of companionship economy in China?
Yeah, I think the first driver is the change of our social structures. Right now, a lot more people are living alone or away from their family. There's one academic study using China's 2020 census data who find that China had about 125 million one-person households, which is about 1/4 of our households. So this is creating a demand for filling these gaps in the daily companionship. And I think the second driver is urban life. So big cities, they have a lot of opportunities, but they also make making relationships and making friends more difficult. So people could be surrounded by other people, but still find it very difficult to coordinate time and build trust with these friends to go to the same place at the same time. And I think the third driver is the rise of service consumption. So in China, for example, the per capita spending on service is rising faster than overall per capita consumption everywhere. So consumers are increasingly willing to pay for these non-material experiences. So I think, also from the supply side as well, the university students and these gig workers, they see this companionship, service as flexible work. So this is also going to help, provide the supply that people need. So I think overall, this is reflecting not just about loneliness, also about how social structure, urbanization, flexible work is all shifting our society into a different shape.
Now, since you talk about loneliness and seeing it as one of the underlying issues here, I mean, the other way around, when companionships can be commercially paid for and purchased, Do you think it might further weaken our, emotional bonds between people in society?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I don't know the answer. I think it's a very complicated topic. These paid companionship, as you said, they may look like we're commercializing friendship, but in many cases, it's actually, we're just talking about a bundle of services like tour guide, photography, conversation, also support for safety, and so on and so forth. I think, the social impact is going to depend on what exactly being sold. If it's, closer to these tourism assistance, coaching, or these event guide, it's simpler. It's not really substituting away for real relationships. But as you said, there's definitely a real risk because human connection, if it becomes more transactional, definitely there's going to change people's expectations when they meet a friend. Also, I think the boundary is very important. So if we're looking for a companionship as a tour guide, I don't want the companion to cross the boundaries. So it's a very complicated question.
Yeah. Now, the providers of these companionship services are often university students or some young gig economy workers. What needs to be done? What can be done to ensure their legitimate rights and interests when they are engaged in a particular deal to provide such kind of services?
Yeah, so I think the first requirement, there need to be a clear agreement before the service begins. So basically what the companion will do, how long the service lasts, which locations that they'll go, what the fee is going to be about, and what is outside the scope of the service. I think this is going to be very important because, the providers of these companionships should not be exposed to, for example, harassment or going to unsafe locations, working overtime and being unpaid, so on and so forth. And I think the platforms that offer these jobs should also have some protections, such as identity verification, such as a clear cancellation rules about complaint, and in terms of payment, if there's disagreements, whether there's an escrow account to set the payments so that there's no quarrel. And I think in terms of liabilities, they also need to be addressed. For example, if there's an injury or loss of property during the hiking, or if there's a dispute over the service quality, the platform need to know in advance who is going to bear which responsibility.
On the other hand, what about how to ensure the rights and even safety guarantees for consumers booking for those services?
Yeah, so consumers, they also need a lot of transparency. They should know in advance about the companion's identity, about his or her service history, ratings, prices, and what's the cancellation policy. The same way as if you're booking a Didi or like a Uber. And I think there need to be clear boundaries for these services. And I think safety is also very, very important. But on the other hand, very difficult because a lot of these services are offline and they're one-on-one. So I think in terms of for the platforms, they should definitely, as I said, provide some ID checks or have some real-time itinerary sharing, so services to kind of provide the safety. And I think also consumers have different preferences and they want different things. So there should be a better matching, algorithm because someone may want the quiet companionship and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. Dr. Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics, joining us from Peking University. Unfortunately, that's all the time for this edition of World Today. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. For further discussion, you can follow us on X at CGTN Radio. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.